The cameras were rolling. 40 million people were watching. And John Wayne just called Muhammad Ali a coward on live television. Wait, because what happened in the next 47 minutes would make John Wayne do something he'd never done in his entire career. Something nobody saw coming, not even the man who thought he knew exactly how this night would end. The year was 1971, February to be exact. Los Angeles was cold that night. And inside the studio, the air was thick with something more than just anticipation. The producers of the Merv Griffin show had just made a decision that would create television history. They'd booked Muhammad Ali for what was supposed to be a standard interview about boxing, about his fight to get his license back, about life after being stripped of his heavyweight title. But someone in that production meeting had what seemed like a brilliant idea. What if they didn't tell Ali who else would be on that couch? What if they surprised him with a guest who hated everything he stood for? What if they brought out John Wayne? The logic was simple, almost too simple. John Wayne was the biggest movie star in the world, the living symbol of American strength and patriotism. He'd spent years giving interviews where he called Ali unpatriotic, a disgrace, someone who was poisoning the minds of young Americans. He'd publicly supported the Vietnam War and condemned anyone who refused to serve. And Muhammad Ali, he'd been banned from boxing for 3.5 years. He'd faced prison time for refusing the draft. He was, in the eyes of millions of Americans, the most hated athlete in the country. The government had taken his passport, his title, his ability to make a living. The producers saw ratings gold. They saw conflict, drama, two American icons screaming at each other on live television. What they didn't see was what would actually happen when these two men sat down face to face. John Wayne arrived at the studio 2 hours before taping. He was 63 years old, still moving with that distinctive walk that had defined American masculinity for 3 decades. He wore his signature Western boots and a perfectly tailored jacket. When he walked into a room, everyone felt it. The crew members straightened up. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. "Where's the draft dodger?" Wayne asked the young production assistant who greeted him at the entrance. His voice had that famous drawl, but there was something else underneath it, something sharp and angry. The assistant, a woman named Sarah, who couldn't have been more than 22, looked nervous. "Mr. Ali is in the green room, sir." "But Mr. Wayne, I should tell you, I don't need to be told anything about that man," Wayne interrupted. "I know exactly who he is and what he represents. And tonight, America's going to see the truth." Sarah wanted to say something. She wanted to tell Wayne that Ali wasn't what he expected, that the man in the green room had spent the last hour talking to the janitors about their families, that everyone who met him walked away surprised by how gentle he was. But John Wayne wasn't interested in hearing it. You could see it in his eyes. He'd made up his mind about Muhammad Ali years ago, and nothing was going to change it. In the green room, Muhammad Ali sat reading a worn copy of a book on philosophy. At 29 years old, he should have been in his prime, should have been defending his title, should have been the undisputed champion of the world. Instead, he'd spent the last 3.5 years banned from the sport he loved, fighting legal battles, watching other men fight for his belt while he sat on the sidelines. The Supreme Court case was still pending. His future was still uncertain. The door opened and Sarah walked in. She looked like she'd been crying, her eyes red and puffy. "Mr. Ali," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Ali looked up and smiled warmly. "What's on your mind, young lady? John Wayne is here. He's going to be on the show with you tonight. The producers didn't tell you because..." She stopped, her voice breaking, "because they wanted it to be a surprise." Ali closed his book slowly and set it aside. "John Wayne," he repeated quietly. "The cowboy movie star." "Yes, sir. And Mr. Ali, I've heard him talking in the hallway. He's angry. He's planning to..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "He wants to call me a coward," Ali said softly. He wants to tell America that I'm a traitor for not going to Vietnam. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I'm so sorry, Mr. Ali. I just thought you should know. It's not fair what they're doing. Ali stood up and walked over to her. He took her hands gently in his, the way a father might comfort a daughter. Sarah, sir. Sarah, let me tell you something. His voice was kind, almost fatherly. I've been called a coward by people much more powerful than John Wayne. I've had the United States government try to put me in prison. I've lost my title, my income, years of my career. But you know what I've never lost? Sarah shook her head, unable to speak. My dignity, because dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you give yourself by staying true to who you are, no matter what anyone else says or does. He released her hands and smiled. Now you go back to your job and don't worry about me. I've faced tougher opponents than a man who shoots blanks in movies. Sarah laughed despite herself, wiping her eyes. You're not scared at all, are you? Scared, Ali said, that famous sparkle appearing in his eyes. I'm Muhammad Ali. I shook up the world. What's one cowboy compared to that? But after Sarah left, something changed in Ali's expression. The smile faded. He walked to the window and looked out at the Los Angeles skyline, at the lights of the city stretching out below him. The truth was simpler and harder than what he'd just told that young woman. He was tired, bone tired, tired of defending himself, tired of explaining his choices to people who'd already decided he was wrong, tired of being the most controversial man in America just for standing up for what he believed in. But tonight, he would face John Wayne, and he would show America what real courage looked like. The studio lights were blinding. As Muhammad Ali walked onto the set, the audience applauded, but it was polite, restrained. You could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Merv Griffin, the host, looked uncomfortable as he made the introduction. He'd been told about the planned confrontation just an hour before taping, and he'd argued against it. But the producers had overruled him. Ladies and gentlemen, Griffin said, his voice tight, please welcome the former heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali. Ali took his seat on the couch, his movements graceful and controlled. He smiled at the audience, but his eyes were scanning the room, waiting. Muhammad, it's great to have you here, Griffin said. Now, before we get into your boxing career, I have a surprise for you. He paused, and you could see him steeling himself for what came next. Please welcome our next guest, Academy Award winner and American legend, John Wayne. The audience erupted. This was what they'd come for. John Wayne strode onto the stage, and his presence filled every corner of that studio. He didn't look at Ali as he took his seat on the opposite end of the couch. The applause died down. Silence fell over the studio, heavy and uncomfortable. Well, Griffin said, trying to break the tension. This is quite a pairing. Two American icons. Let's not pretend we're equals, Wayne interrupted, his voice cutting through the studio like a knife. I'm an American icon. That man over there is something else entirely. The audience gasped. Even by 1971 standards, this was shocking. Ali remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. Mr. Wayne, Griffin said carefully, perhaps we could— No, Merv. Let's get right to it. Wayne turned to face Ali directly. I've wanted to say this to your face for years. You're a disgrace. You're a coward. While real American men were dying in Vietnam, bleeding in the mud, you were hiding behind your religion, refusing to serve your country. The studio was completely silent. Cameramen exchanged nervous glances. The producers were frozen in the control booth, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this continue. Ali still hadn't moved. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking at Wayne with an expression that was impossible to read. You call yourself the greatest, Wayne continued, his voice rising. But there's nothing great about a man who won't fight for his country. Nothing great about someone who turns his back on the men who are dying to protect his freedom. Wayne paused, breathing heavily, his face flushed. "Well?" he demanded. "Don't you have anything to say for yourself?" The entire studio leaned forward. 40 million people across America were watching their television screens, waiting for Ali's response. Muhammad Ali unfolded his hands slowly and leaned slightly forward. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. There was no anger in it, no defensiveness, just quiet certainty. "Mr. Wayne," he began, "you just called me a coward, so let me ask you something." He paused. "Have you ever been to Vietnam?" Wayne's eyes narrowed. "I've supported our troops every way I can. I've done everything in my power to—" "That's not what I asked," Ali interrupted softly. "I asked if you've ever been to Vietnam. Have you ever held a rifle in a jungle? Have you ever watched a friend die in front of you? Have you ever been shot at by someone trying to kill you?" Wayne's jaw tightened. "I served my country in other ways." "You made movies," Ali said. "You played soldiers. You pretended to be brave while other men were actually being brave. And now you sit here and call me a coward because I refuse to pretend." The audience stirred. This wasn't what they'd expected. "Let me tell you something about courage, Mr. Wayne." Ali's voice grew stronger, that famous poetic rhythm emerging. "Courage isn't doing what's easy. Courage isn't doing what everyone expects you to do. Courage is standing up for what you believe in, even when the whole world is against you." He stood up slowly, and the cameras followed him. "When I refused to go to Vietnam, they took everything from me. They took my title. They took my license. They took away 3.5 years of my career, the best years of my life. They threatened to put me in prison for 5 years. My own country turned against me." Ali walked to the center of the stage, his presence commanding the entire room. "You know what they offered me? They said if I just went to Vietnam, I wouldn't even have to fight. I'd just do exhibitions, entertain the troops, shake some hands, keep my title, keep my money, keep my freedom. All I had to do was put on a uniform and pretend to support a war I believed was wrong." He turned to look directly at Wayne. "That's what you would have done, isn't it, Mr. Wayne? Put on a costume and pretend. That's what you've been doing your whole career." Wayne's face was red. "Now you listen here." "No," Ali said firmly. The authority in his voice was absolute. "You've had your say. Now you're going to listen to mine." Even John Wayne fell silent. "I didn't refuse to go to Vietnam because I was afraid to die," Ali continued. "I refused because I was afraid to kill. I refused because my religion teaches me that all human life is sacred. I refused because those Vietnamese people never called me the N-word. They never lynched my people. They never denied me my rights as a human being." His voice cracked slightly, but he kept going. "You want to know what I am, Mr. Wayne? I'm a man who gave up everything. Everything, for what I believed in. I'm a man who faced prison rather than betray his conscience. I'm a man who stood alone against the most powerful government in the world and said, 'No, this is wrong, and I won't be part of it.'" He walked back toward Wayne, stopping just a few feet away. "You call that cowardice? Then you don't know what courage means." The studio was absolutely silent. Merv Griffin sat frozen in his chair. The audience seemed to have stopped breathing. John Wayne stared at Muhammad Ali, and something in his expression was changing. The anger was still there, but beneath it, something else was emerging, something that looked almost like doubt. "You think you're the only one who ever sacrificed anything?" Wayne said, but his voice had lost its edge. "You think you're the only one who ever stood up for what you believed in?" "No," Ali said quietly. "I think we all have to make choices about who we want to be, and I think those choices define us more than anything else." He sat back down, but this time he sat closer to Wayne. "Mr. Wayne, I've watched your movies. I grew up watching them. I know you believe in honor, in courage, in doing what's right. Those are the values you've spent your whole career celebrating." Wayne nodded slowly, uncertain where this was going. "So tell me," Ali continued, In all those movies, when the hero stands up against injustice, when he refuses to back down even when everyone is against him, when he sacrifices everything for his principles, he paused. Isn't that exactly what I did? The question hung in the air. Wayne opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The only difference, Ali said softly, is that I wasn't playing a role, I was living it, and the injustice I was standing against wasn't in some screenplay, it was real. It's still real. Listen to what's happening here, because this is the moment everything changed. For the first time all evening, John Wayne looked away. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, slowly relaxed. His shoulders sagged slightly. I came here tonight to destroy you, Wayne said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I know, Ali replied. I was so sure I was right, so sure you were everything wrong with this country. Wayne was silent for a long moment. When he looked up, there was something in his eyes that the cameras caught, something that would be replayed for decades to come. And now, Wayne said slowly, I'm not sure of anything anymore. The audience didn't know how to react. This wasn't the confrontation they'd expected. This was something else entirely, something raw and human and true. Mr. Wayne, Ali said, can I tell you a story? Wayne nodded, not trusting his voice. When I was a boy in Louisville, my father took me to see one of your movies. I think it was Stagecoach. Ali smiled at the memory. And I remember sitting in that theater, just a little kid, and thinking, that man is so brave. That man stands up for what's right, no matter what. You were my hero, Mr. Wayne. Wayne looked up sharply, surprised. And then I grew up, Ali continued. And I learned that the world is more complicated than the movies. I learned that sometimes the people calling you a hero are wrong, and the people calling you a villain are wrong too. I learned that the only person who can judge your courage is you. He leaned forward. I don't hate you, Mr. Wayne. I don't even blame you for what you said tonight. You believed what you believed, just like I believe what I believe. The difference is, I had to pay for my beliefs. I had to sacrifice for them. And that's something you can't understand until you've done it yourself. The producers called for a commercial break. The studio lights dimmed. The audience began murmuring, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. John Wayne stood up abruptly and walked off the stage without a word. Ali watched him go, his expression thoughtful. Merv Griffin approached Ali, looking shaken. Muhammad, I am so sorry. We never should have. It's all right, Merv, Ali said calmly. Sometimes people need to say things out loud before they can hear how wrong they sound. What do you think he's going to do? Ali smiled slightly. I think he's going to think. Maybe for the first time in a long time. In the hallway outside the studio, John Wayne stood alone. His hands were shaking, but not from anger. From something else, something he hadn't felt in years, something that felt like shame. Sarah, the young production assistant, walked past on her way to the control room. She stopped when she saw his face. Mr. Wayne, are you all right? Wayne looked at her, and she was shocked to see that his eyes were wet. John Wayne, the man who'd played the toughest cowboys and soldiers in Hollywood history, had tears in his eyes. That man in there, Wayne said slowly. I've spent years hating him, years thinking he was everything wrong with this country, and in 10 minutes, he couldn't finish the sentence. He made you see what, Mr. Wayne? That maybe I was wrong, Wayne whispered. About him. About what courage means. About a lot of things. Sarah didn't know what to say. This was John Wayne, the symbol of American strength and certainty, standing in a television studio hallway questioning everything he believed. Mr. Wayne, Sarah said gently, it's not too late. The show isn't over. You could go back out there. Wayne shook his head. And say what? That I was wrong? That everything I've said for years about that man was wrong? Would that be so bad? Wayne looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, something changed in his expression. No, he said quietly. No, I suppose it wouldn't. When the show returned from commercial, Merv Griffin was prepared to finish the interview with Ali alone. The assumption was that John Wayne had left the building, but as Griffin began speaking, movement from the side of the stage caught everyone's attention. John Wayne was walking back onto the set. The audience fell silent. Ali turned to watch, his expression unreadable. Wayne walked slowly, deliberately, until he was standing directly in front of Muhammad Ali. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. America held its breath. Then John Wayne did something that no one expected. He extended his hand. "Mr. Ali," Wayne said, his voice thick with emotion. "I owe you an apology." The audience gasped. This was John Wayne, the man who never apologized, the symbol of American certainty and strength, publicly admitting he was wrong in front of 40 million people. Ali stood slowly and took Wayne's hand. "I came here tonight to tear you down," Wayne continued. "I came here convinced that you were a coward and a traitor, but you're not. You're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You're braver than I've ever been, Mr. Wayne," Ali began. "No, let me finish." Wayne's grip on Ali's hand tightened. "I've spent my whole career playing heroes, men who stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. But it was all pretend. When the cameras stopped rolling, I went home to my comfortable life, my money, my fame. I never had to sacrifice anything real." He looked directly into Ali's eyes. "You didn't have that luxury. You stood up for what you believed in, and you paid for it with everything you had. That's not cowardice. That's the kind of courage I've only ever pretended to have." The studio was completely silent. Tears were streaming down faces in the audience. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Wayne said. "The things I've said about you in public and in private were unforgivable. But I want you to know that from this moment on, I will never speak against you again. And if anyone asks me about Muhammad Ali, I will tell them the truth." "What truth is that, Mr. Wayne?" Wayne smiled sadly. "That you're exactly the kind of man I spent my career pretending to be, a real American hero." He released Ali's hand and turned to the audience. "I was wrong," he said simply, "about this man, about what courage means, about a lot of things, and I'm not too proud to admit it." The episode aired 3 weeks later, and the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Newspapers across the country ran headlines about the confrontation. "Wayne apologizes to Ali" became one of the most talked about moments in television history. But the most significant change happened between the two men themselves. 3 months after the broadcast, John Wayne invited Muhammad Ali to visit him at his home in Newport Beach. Ali accepted, and the two spent an afternoon talking. Not about politics or war or controversy, but about life, family, and what it meant to be a man in America. "You know what surprised me most about that night?" Wayne asked as they sat on his patio overlooking the ocean, watching the waves roll in. "What's that?" "You never got angry. I said the worst things anyone has ever said to you on national television, and you never raised your voice. You never attacked me back. You just spoke the truth." Ali smiled. "Anger is easy. Truth is hard. And I learned a long time ago that you can't change someone's mind by making them defensive. You can only change it by making them think." Wayne nodded slowly. "You made me think. For the first time in years, you made me actually question what I believed and why I believed it." "And what did you decide?" Wayne was quiet for a long moment. "I decided that I'd been playing a character for so long that I forgot how to be a real person. I decided that courage isn't about never being afraid or never being wrong. It's about being willing to admit when you are wrong and to change." He turned to look at Ali directly. "You taught me that, Muhammad. In one evening, you taught me something I should have learned decades ago." The friendship that developed between John Wayne and Muhammad Ali remained largely private. Wayne, whose health was already declining, didn't have many years left, But those who knew both men said the connection forged that night was genuine and lasting. They spoke on the phone occasionally, exchanged letters, and when Wayne was at his sickest, Ali called him every week. When John Wayne died in 1979, among his personal effects was a photograph of himself and Muhammad Ali, taken during that visit to Newport Beach. The two men were smiling, relaxed, like old friends. On the back, in Wayne's handwriting, were the words, "The bravest man I ever met." Years later, when asked about that night, Muhammad Ali would smile and say something that surprised people. "John Wayne wasn't my enemy. He was just a man who believed what he was told to believe, and when he saw the truth, he had the courage to change his mind." That's rare. That's precious. That's what I respect. The footage from that Merv Griffin episode became one of the most studied moments in broadcast history. It's shown in journalism schools as an example of how confrontation can lead to understanding. It's used in conflict resolution courses as a masterclass in responding to hatred with dignity. It's played in civil rights education to demonstrate the power of truth over prejudice. But the most important lesson has nothing to do with television or conflict resolution or civil rights. It's simpler than that. Muhammad Ali could have destroyed John Wayne that night. He could have attacked him, humiliated him, made him look like a fool in front of 40 million people. Wayne had given him every reason and every opportunity. Instead, Ali chose compassion. He chose to see the fear and confusion behind Wayne's hatred. He chose to offer understanding instead of revenge. And in doing so, he didn't just win an argument. He changed a man's heart. That's the real power of dignity. It doesn't just defend against attacks, it transforms the attackers. When Muhammad Ali died in 2016, among the thousands of tributes was one that stood out. It was from a film historian who had spent years researching John Wayne's life and career. "In all my research," he wrote, "I found only one instance of John Wayne publicly admitting he was wrong about anything. It was the night he met Muhammad Ali, and it changed him for the rest of his life." The world doesn't need more people who are right. It needs more people who are gracious. It needs more people who can see the fear behind the hate, the pain behind the anger, the humanity behind the attack. Muhammad Ali wasn't great because he never lost. He was great because even when someone tried to hurt him, he chose to help them instead. John Wayne wasn't weak for changing his mind. He was strong. It takes more courage to admit you're wrong than to insist you're right. And somewhere in a television archive, there's proof of the moment when two American legends faced each other across the deepest divide in their nation's history. One came to destroy, the other chose to heal. And the cameras caught something nobody expected. The moment hatred turned to respect, and enemies became friends. If this story moved you, I'd be grateful if you'd consider sharing it with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to change your mind, never too late to admit you were wrong, and never too late to become the person you always pretended to be. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. Muhammad Ali taught us how to fight in the ring, but more importantly, he taught us how to fight for what matters with dignity, with grace, and with an unshakable belief that even our enemies deserve a chance at redemption. If you want to hear what happened the night John Wayne showed up unannounced at Ali's training camp 6 months later, tell me in the comments.